Welcome to the Growth Boss podcast, where we seek out the secrets to high-performing campaigns from some of the smartest marketers in the world. I'm your host, Jared Smith. Today, I have Amanda Jordan with me, and she's going to teach us what it takes to double an industry-leading e-commerce company in 3 months. Amanda, thanks for being here today.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me. This is actually really interesting because this was a client that I consulted previously. They were doing pretty good, and I was just a consultant and they hired someone in-house. So I was like, okay, I'll let off the brake. I'll put the brakes on. You can handle this. And things apparently didn't go too well. They started to see a dramatic drop in visibility and rankings. And the CEO who I previously worked with reached out to me again. And he's like, you're the only person I trust to look into this and figure out what's going on. When it happened to be around the October, November 2023 core algo update time. Okay. So his immediate thought is like, okay, there's something we're doing that Google doesn't like.
Yep.
And that's why our rankings dropped, our visibility dropped, and we're getting less clicks. So despite him being the CEO, and I know that he likes SEO and understands it to some extent, and being a good friend of mine, I didn't take his word for it. That is actually one of the things that I always recommend doing, even if it's another SEO giving you that advice or telling you what they see happening with the data. Don't just take their word for it. Look at the data yourself and try to identify the patterns for yourself and understand what's going on.
I love it.
Yeah, because it doesn't necessarily mean it can be very coincidental that your drop off lines up with an algo update. It may not be that you were necessarily hit by it. And the way that I like to identify patterns is like I like to do a branded versus non-branded. So to see if there's anything different there. A lot of times I actually find that a drop in branded is what a business is seeing, but they think it's like their rankings drop, but it's like, no, fewer people are searching for your brand. So your traffic that's most likely to convert dropped specifically because if someone's looking for you by name, they're more likely to be making a purchasing decision, especially if you're an e-commerce store.
100%.
So so I did that. I looked at it by page type too. So like segmented it to see like, okay, what types of pages drop. Especially that's important to do if you think your site has been hit by an algorithm update, because that gives you a good idea too of like, okay, is it just informational content that dropped? Is it like our category pages? Is it actual product pages? So one of the things I noticed is that their clicks dropped, but their impressions didn't drop and their rankings didn't drop. So I look, and it was odd. I was like, interesting. So like if their clicks drop, but they're just as visible as they were before, what do the search results look like?
Yeah.
So I went and started searching as if I was a customer for their top services and top products. This is an e-commerce site. And then I was like, okay, we rank number 1 or number 2. The only person that's beating us most of the time is the manufacturer. So what is going on?
Yeah.
Like, we can't do anything about that. So what I did was actually went to ChatGPT and gave it screenshots of the search results and said,
wow,
what is the difference between these in a way that would make someone want to click one over the other? Because this isn't actually an SEO issue at this point. Sure, it impacts SEO, but this is an issue of like how they show up in search results, which I guess technically that does make it an SEO issue. It's just not like a situation.
Yeah, not traditional though.
Issue. Yeah. It's a marketing issue and like visibility issue and like brand recognition issue. It's not necessarily like there's something I can do to improve my visibility or rankings even more.
Right.
It's changing something to appeal to the target audience by changing a behavior or how your listing looked up. So that was the first step of what I did. I asked ChatGPT to like, hey, this is our target audience. This is actually like a dry or vape e-commerce store. So organic and SEO is the only way other than social media they can get leads or customers. So I gave them the information about their like target audience. And I said, what would make someone in this target audience choose this one over this one? Because I think I'm a data-focused SEO and data-focused marketer. I'm not a creative marketer. It's hard for me to get into the mindset of a customer. So I needed ChatGPT to do this because I was never going to figure it out myself.
I love that.
So that's what I did. I mean, I had to compare the strengths and weaknesses and the features of the search results and tell me why someone would click on one of a competitor instead of them. And then it made recommendations based off of that. And one of the things it recommended, and this is so dumb because it actually is an SEO thing, is like, well, your posts are from like 2021. They haven't been updated even in the data showing and search results. So that was one of the things I did, was just go through and every blog post that saw a drop in traffic and revenue, I went back and updated those. And like Google prefers for you to make an actual update on the page. So it's not like, oh, I'm going to just change the date and that's good enough.
Right.
You should be adding something valuable to the page too, and making changes to the content. So I mate recommendations to their team to update and improve the content based on like a competitor analysis, and then use that as a reason why we could update the date that, or the last date it was published or edited. And that helped. And it helped us actually move sometimes from that spot 2 or 3 to number 1, just by having fresher content.
Yeah.
So, and like just those 2 things alone, having ChatGPT help me understand how people were seeing their search results, and making changes like adding the discount that they offered on these products that weren't listed before, adding the thumbnail image that you can get with structured data to it, making sure our pricing was visible, adding things like that they offer discrete shipping or like free extra products that come with it to improve the enticing like nature of their search results in general. And then plus making sure that the content that we knew that could convert and has converted in the past was fresh. Those 2 things helped them double their leads in 3 months. They went from $250,000 in revenue from organic alone, just from SEO, like Google organic alone, to 500,000 year over year.
Amazing.
Year over year, which is crazy. Next 3 months, they continue with that. So they made $3 million more in 6 months from something that was from ChatGPT and refreshing content.
I love it. That's amazing. You know, a couple things that I really like about this story so far is, one, you didn't take the SEO for his word. Like you said, you know, I want to dig in. I want to figure this out myself. A lot of people don't understand that there's a lot of different ways to do SEO. And and there's a lot of ways to do SEO well, right? Like we could both get number 1 rankings, do it very differently. It doesn't mean one way is better than the other. They're just different. And so I love that, because you're like, cool, you know, that's great. That's a perspective. You know, let me just dig into the data. Let me dig into some of the stats and see what comes up. The second thing that I love is you recognized your weakness in this, and you're like, listen, maybe I'm not the most creative marketer, but I'm really good at data. And I recognize, you know, how I can kind of fill in that gap with ChatGPT, which I didn't even know you could do with images. So that's super cool. And you were able to get the answers you needed to come up with some sort of creative solution for them.
Yeah. And they loved it, to the point they're like, what else can we use AI for? How else can it help us? But like a really part of it, especially with using AI, is understanding its strengths and weaknesses too. Because it is, especially tools like ChatGPT, they're generative. So they're trying to guess what the next word they should provide is based on what you put in, not that it's actually thinking or forming an actual idea of its own. So it can be really tricky. And that's why it's important to provide the data to it. Like say like, hey, these are the images I'm looking at. This is the target audience, because like without that extra context, it could give you all kinds of things. I've actually was working on a YouTube video earlier this month, and I asked ChatGPT for examples for our case studies, and it just made up, it had actual data, like the information it gave was good, but when I asked it for URL, like for the source, it just made up a URL that did not exist on several different sites.
Oh my goodness.
Because it just it's taking the information it can find about this thing I'm asking a case study about from different websites. It's not pulling it from one legitimate source like we would think of doing. So it can be very tricky, but it can also be super helpful. I also had to do some competitive analysis where I took the entire page and I had it compare the competitor page to our page and say like, hey, like these are things I noticed. What are things that you notice that are different from this page about this page from like a creative like conversion perspective versus from an analytical
Mm.
perspective to help with that too.
And what were some things that popped up in that?
Yeah, so a lot of it were like things that related to conversions that I didn't think of, like moving buttons to a certain place, like, hey, this button, your button is further down on the page, or the type of content they were providing. So I think a lot of times SEOs think about like, okay, this is topically relevant. It should rank for these keywords. It should rank for this topic. We're good. But I've seen a lot of this come up lately where it's not just being topically relevant, but actually having an understanding of what type of content it needs to be too.
Yeah.
So like it doesn't need to be clinical in nature based on how that person is searching. Doesn't need to be just like straight up informational. Doesn't need to like what type of personality the content needs to have to communicate correctly with your base. And I've seen that happen a lot lately. Actually, we have another client where I was helping one of our strategists come up with like, okay, like we're not getting the response that we would expect to for this page. And we looked at their competitors, and their competitors were way more clinical and medical in their focus of their content. It was autism therapy.
Okay.
While ours almost looked like a after school program. So
Mm.
that difference alone in the perspective that we took on the same content and trying
Yep.
to rank for the same services
Yeah.
was the difference between how they ranked and how we ranked. And I think
Yep.
it's really interesting that it's coming down to that. And it means that we just have to actually think like, I don't know, the people we're trying to have find us
Yeah.
versus like checking off boxes.
Right. Exactly. I love that. And that's 100% true. You can't just, again, work off a checklist necessarily. You have to put yourself in the shoes of who you're serving and what are they looking for? How do you serve them better? So that's great. Any other big insights on this project?
Like, I think my biggest insight is like, don't underestimate the value of the most simple things in SEO.
Yeah.
I do think a lot of times we overcomplicate something, and I think that's the problem that their previous SEO had. And I'm not saying that I was like I'm some genius and that's how I figured it out. I did. ChatGPT definitely helped me. And not seeing the site in a while because I had previously consulted them and I was taking a break from it, and they only came back because they asked for help. So because of that, like I was coming in with fresher eyes.
Yep.
And that is another thing that's good about getting other perspectives on a problem, is that those fresh eyes can see something that you missed because you looked at the site over and over again.
Yeah.
Or it's your website, or you're the one that did most of the work on it. So you don't like, it's hard for you to see what could be missing, especially if you're like, this is your baby and it's the site you've done the most work on and you haven't worked on other sites. I also think that's another thing that's really important for SEOs to get experience working in different types of SEO. Because like that, there's so many different ways to solve a problem. And I solve this problem for them, and I'm primarily a local SEO. So like it's not a situation like the principles and things you learn in other areas of SEO can apply to others. And I think having that experience outside of e-commerce helped me look at it from a different perspective, because I wasn't looking for a specific thing. I was just looking to see what I found.
Absolutely. And that's something that I noticed, the earlier part of my career, I just worked with attorneys. And so there's certain things that you just see in the legal market that you don't necessarily see with other businesses. And so when you flip over to e-commerce, so you start working for a doctor and you're like, hey, why aren't you guys doing this or this or this? Like all the things that are kind of the norm in one industry may not be in the other, but they're, it's something that just works across the board.
Oh man, I did that too. I also worked with an agency that only did legal for a bit of a time, and that is like a very quick way to improve your SEO skills because it's so competitive. Like it's so competitive, and there's so many things that are like different, and there's so many things that like we discount in general. Like, oh, that doesn't make that big of a deal, but for an attorney, and it's so it can be so competitive where like you're like, having two keywords in a page title shouldn't make that big of a difference. But you will run into an instance if you're working with attorneys where that is the biggest difference you could have made. And it's wild that it happens like that.
It's all about the little things when you get into these super, super competitive niches. Yeah. Well, awesome. Well, Amanda, this has been a great, highly tactical episode. Everybody should have some takeaways, which is awesome. What are the best ways for people to get in touch with you if either they want to work with you or follow you? I know you have a very active social presence as well.
I'm actually on TikTok and YouTube as Amanda Jordan SEO. You can find the agency I work for at ricketyroo.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.